For years, Microsoft Windows has been the undisputed king of desktop computing. Whether in offices, schools, businesses, or homes, Windows has maintained a dominant position that seemed almost impossible to challenge. Millions of users became accustomed to its interface, software ecosystem, and compatibility with a vast range of hardware. Yet beneath the surface of the technology industry, a quiet shift has been taking place. A Linux-based operating system has steadily gained momentum, attracting users who once would never have considered leaving Windows behind. Even more surprising is the fact that this Linux operating system has developed an unexpected connection with Microsoft itself, creating a situation that few technology experts could have predicted a decade ago. The story begins with the changing expectations of modern computer users. In the early days of personal computing, operating systems were judged mainly by their ability to run software and support hardware. Today, users expect much more. They want speed, security, privacy, customization, reliability, and freedom from unnecessary restrictions. As technology evolved, some users began questioning whether traditional operating systems still met all of these expectations. Rising hardware requirements, increasing integration of online services, and concerns about data collection encouraged many people to explore alternatives. This growing curiosity opened the door for Linux distributions to gain attention among mainstream audiences. Unlike Windows, Linux is not a single operating system. It is an open-source kernel that serves as the foundation for many different distributions. Each distribution is designed with specific goals and audiences in mind. Some focus on simplicity, others emphasize performance, and some are tailored for developers or enterprise environments. Among these distributions, Ubuntu emerged as one of the most influential and recognizable names. Created with the goal of making Linux accessible to everyone, Ubuntu simplified many aspects of the Linux experience. Installation became easier, hardware compatibility improved, and users gained access to a vast collection of software through centralized repositories. Ubuntu's rise was significant because it addressed one of Linux's biggest historical challenges: accessibility. For years, Linux had a reputation for being difficult to use. New users often encountered unfamiliar terminology, command line tools, and complex configuration processes. Ubuntu worked to eliminate many of these barriers by providing a polished graphical interface and a user-friendly experience. As a result, people who had spent their entire lives using Windows suddenly found themselves considering Linux as a realistic option. At the same time, broader changes in the software industry were helping Linux gain ground. The internet transformed the way people use computers. Many applications that once required installation became available through web browsers. Cloud-based services reduced dependence on specific operating systems. Productivity tools, communication platforms, and creative applications increasingly worked across multiple environments. This shift weakened one of Windows' traditional advantages: exclusive access to important software. Users no longer needed a particular operating system to perform many everyday tasks. Security concerns also contributed to Linux's growing popularity. Cybersecurity became a major topic as digital threats increased around the world. Users wanted operating systems that could protect their information and provide greater transparency. Linux benefited from its open-source nature, allowing developers and security researchers to examine code, identify vulnerabilities, and contribute improvements. While no operating system is completely immune to threats, the collaborative development model behind Linux helped build confidence among users concerned about security and privacy. Performance became another area where Linux attracted attention. Many Linux distributions are known for their efficiency and ability to run smoothly on a wide range of hardware. Computers that struggle with newer versions of commercial operating systems often perform surprisingly well when running Linux. This capability proved especially valuable for users seeking to extend the lifespan of older devices. Instead of replacing hardware, many discovered that installing Linux could restore speed and responsiveness. As awareness of this benefit spread, more people began experimenting with Linux-based systems. However, the most surprising aspect of Linux's rise was not its growing popularity. The real surprise was Microsoft's evolving relationship with the Linux ecosystem. For much of technology history, Microsoft and Linux were viewed as competitors, representing fundamentally different philosophies. Microsoft built proprietary software products and commercial platforms, while Linux embodied open-source collaboration and community-driven development. Many observers assumed that these worlds would remain permanently opposed. That assumption began to change as the technology landscape evolved. Cloud computing emerged as one of the most important sectors in the industry, and Linux became a dominant force within data centers and server environments. Organizations running websites, applications, and online services increasingly relied on Linux-based infrastructure. Microsoft recognized this reality and adapted accordingly. Rather than resisting Linux, the company began supporting it in ways that surprised many longtime industry observers. One of the clearest examples of this shift was the introduction of the Windows subsystem for Linux. This feature allowed users to run Linux environments directly within Windows. Developers could access Linux tools, commands, and workflows without leaving the Windows operating system. The significance of this move cannot be overstated. A company once perceived as Linux's biggest rival was now integrating Linux functionality into its flagship product. For developers and technical professionals, this represented a major improvement in flexibility and productivity. The Windows subsystem for Linux continued to evolve through multiple versions. Performance improvements, expanded compatibility, and support for graphical applications made it increasingly useful. Developers who relied on Linux tools but preferred Windows for other tasks no longer had to choose between platforms. They could work within both ecosystems simultaneously. This convergence demonstrated how the boundaries between operating systems were becoming less rigid than they had been in previous decades. Microsoft's involvement with Linux extended far beyond desktop integration. The company became an active contributor to open source projects and expanded Linux support throughout its cloud services. Microsoft Azure, one of the world's leading cloud platforms, hosts large numbers of Linux workloads. In fact, Linux became such an important component of Azure that supporting open source technologies evolved from a strategic option into a business necessity. This transformation reflected a broader industry trend in which cooperation often proved more valuable than strict competition. The growing popularity of Linux among developers further strengthened its position. Software development increasingly relies on tools, frameworks, and environments that originated within the open source community. Linux provides a natural platform for many of these technologies. Developers appreciate its flexibility, scripting capabilities, package management systems, and compatibility with modern development workflows. As more people entered the software industry, Linux became a common part of their professional toolkit. Gaming, historically one of Windows' strongest advantages, also experienced significant changes. For many years, Linux users faced limitations when attempting to play popular games. The situation improved dramatically with the development of compatibility technologies such as Proton. Supported by Valve, Proton allows thousands of Windows games to run on Linux with minimal effort. The success of the Steam Deck demonstrated that Linux could support modern gaming experiences at a level previously considered impossible. This achievement removed another major obstacle that had discouraged potential Linux adopters. Hardware manufacturers also contributed to Linux's momentum. More companies began offering devices with Linux compatibility in mind. Improvements in driver support reduced technical frustrations and simplified installation. Users could purchase hardware with greater confidence that it would function correctly under Linux. As compatibility improved, Linux became increasingly practical for everyday computing, rather than merely a niche choice for enthusiasts. Privacy concerns played an additional role in Linux's appeal. Many users became more aware of how operating systems collect and process data. Linux distributions often provide greater transparency and user control compared to proprietary alternatives. Open source code allows independent examination of system behavior, giving users confidence regarding what their operating system is doing behind the scenes. For individuals who value privacy, this transparency represents a compelling advantage. The rise of Linux does not necessarily mean that Windows is disappearing. Windows continues to dominate many areas of desktop computing and remains deeply embedded within business environments worldwide. However, Linux's growth demonstrates that the market is becoming more diverse. Users now have viable alternatives that offer competitive experiences across productivity, development, education, and entertainment. This increased competition encourages innovation and provides consumers with more choices. Industry analysts frequently note that modern computing is becoming increasingly platform independent. Cloud services, web applications, and cross-platform development frameworks reduce the importance of any single operating system. In this environment, Linux benefits from its flexibility and adaptability. Users can choose operating systems based on personal preferences rather than software limitations. This shift represents a fundamental change from earlier eras when operating system selection often determined which applications could be used. The relationship between Microsoft and Linux serves as a powerful example of how technology evolves. What once appeared to be an intense rivalry transformed into a complex partnership, shaped by shared interests and changing industry realities. Microsoft supports Linux because its customers rely on it. Linux benefits from Microsoft's contributions and integrations. Developers, businesses, and consumers ultimately gain from this cooperation because it expands their options and improves interoperability. As Linux continues challenging Windows in various areas of computing, its connection to Microsoft remains one of the most fascinating developments in the technology world. The operating system that once symbolized opposition to proprietary software now works alongside one of the largest software companies on Earth. This unexpected relationship reflects broader trends toward openness, collaboration, and flexibility in modern computing. For users exploring alternatives to traditional platforms, Linux offers a powerful combination of performance, security, customization, and innovation. Its growing influence suggests that the future of personal computing may be far more diverse than many people once imagined, and its surprising connection with Microsoft is helping drive that transformation. As Linux continued gaining attention among desktop users, businesses, educational institutions, and developers began taking a closer look at what made these operating systems increasingly attractive. While many people initially viewed Linux as an alternative primarily for technical users, that perception gradually changed as modern distributions became easier to install, simpler to manage, and more visually polished. The growing maturity of the Linux ecosystem allowed it to compete in areas that were once dominated almost exclusively by Windows. This evolution marked an important turning point because success in the desktop market requires more than technical capability. It requires an operating system that ordinary users can adopt without significant training or frustration. One of the key reasons Linux gained momentum was its flexibility. Unlike proprietary operating systems that are distributed in a largely fixed form, Linux allows developers and organizations to customize nearly every aspect of the user experience. Different distributions can be optimized for speed, security, stability, education, creative work, software development, or enterprise deployment. This flexibility enables users to choose an operating system that aligns with their specific needs, rather than adapting their workflow to the limitations of a single platform. For many individuals, this level of control represents a major advantage. The open source nature of Linux also plays a significant role in its growing popularity. Because the source code is publicly available, developers from around the world can contribute improvements, identify bugs, and create new features. This collaborative model encourages rapid innovation and transparency. Users are not dependent on a single company to determine the future direction of the operating system. Instead, development is driven by a broad community that includes independent contributors, nonprofit organizations, universities, and commercial enterprises. This approach has helped Linux evolve into one of the most successful collaborative software projects in history. Educational institutions have increasingly embraced Linux because of its accessibility and cost advantages. Schools, universities, and training centers often operate under tight budgets and seek ways to maximize resources. Linux provides a powerful computing platform without the licensing costs associated with many proprietary operating systems. Students gain access to programming tools, scientific software, and educational resources while learning skills that are valuable in technology-related careers. Because Linux is widely used in servers, cloud infrastructure, and software development environments, familiarity with the platform can provide important professional advantages. The role of Linux in software development cannot be overstated. Many of the technologies that power the modern internet were built on Linux systems. Web servers, cloud platforms, containers, databases, and development frameworks frequently rely on Linux environments. As a result, developers often prefer operating systems that closely resemble the environments where their applications will ultimately run. Linux provides this consistency, making it a natural choice for programming, testing, and deployment. Its command line tools, scripting capabilities, and package management systems contribute to highly efficient workflows that many developers find difficult to replicate elsewhere. Microsoft recognized this reality as software development practices evolved. Rather than attempting to isolate Windows from the open source ecosystem, the company began embracing technologies that developers already relied upon. This strategic shift was motivated by practical considerations. Developers represent one of the most influential groups within the technology industry, and supporting their preferred tools became increasingly important. The introduction of Linux integration features within Windows demonstrated Microsoft's willingness to adapt to changing market conditions and customer expectations. The Windows subsystem for Linux became one of the clearest examples of this transformation. By allowing Linux environments to run directly inside Windows, Microsoft reduced barriers between two ecosystems that had historically been viewed as competitors. Developers could access Linux utilities, scripting languages, and software packages without abandoning Windows-based workflows. This integration created a more flexible environment that appealed to a wide range of users. It also signaled a broader shift toward interoperability rather than strict platform separation. Cloud computing further strengthened the relationship between Microsoft and Linux. As organizations migrated applications and services to cloud platforms, Linux emerged as a dominant operating system within data centers. Many businesses chose Linux because of its stability, performance, and scalability. Microsoft Azure adapted to this reality by offering extensive support for Linux-based workloads. Today, a substantial percentage of workloads running in cloud environments rely on Linux technologies. This dependence illustrates how essential Linux has become to modern computing infrastructure. The success of Linux in cloud computing influenced perceptions of its capabilities on desktop systems as well. Businesses that already relied on Linux servers often became more comfortable considering Linux desktops for certain use cases. Employees working in development, research, and technical support roles sometimes benefited from using operating systems that aligned closely with server environments. While Windows remained dominant in many corporate settings, Linux gained credibility as a viable option for specific professional applications. Another area where Linux made significant progress was user interface design. Earlier, Linux distributions often prioritized functionality over visual appeal, which limited their appeal among mainstream audiences. Modern distributions, however, invested heavily in creating attractive, intuitive desktop environments. Interfaces became cleaner, navigation improved, and overall user experiences became more polished. Many users who tried Linux for the first time were surprised to discover systems that felt modern, responsive, and visually sophisticated. Application availability also improved dramatically. Historically, software compatibility represented one of the largest obstacles facing Linux adoption. Many popular programs were available only for Windows, forcing users to choose between operating systems based on software requirements. Over time, developers increasingly adopted cross-platform technologies that allowed applications to run on multiple operating systems. Web-based software further reduced dependence on specific platforms. As a result, many everyday tasks could be performed equally well regardless of whether a user chose Windows, Linux, or another operating system. Gaming represented one of the most significant breakthroughs for Linux adoption. For years, Windows maintained a dominant position because of its extensive game compatibility. Linux users often faced challenges related to drivers, software support, and performance optimization. This situation began changing when major companies invested in Linux gaming technologies. Compatibility tools allowed Windows games to run effectively on Linux systems, dramatically expanding the available game library. The release of Linux-powered gaming devices demonstrated that the platform could support high-quality gaming experiences, challenging assumptions that had persisted for decades. Performance remains one of Linux's strongest advantages. Many distributions are optimized for efficiency, enabling them to run smoothly on hardware ranging from powerful workstations to aging laptops. Users frequently report improved responsiveness and reduced resource consumption compared to other operating systems. This efficiency is particularly appealing to individuals seeking to maximize the value of existing hardware. Rather than purchasing new computers, many users discover that Linux provides a practical way to extend device lifespans while maintaining satisfactory performance. Security continues to be another important factor driving Linux adoption. Open source development allows vulnerabilities to be identified and addressed through transparent processes. Security researchers, independent developers, and organizations contribute to ongoing improvements. While no operating system can guarantee complete protection, Linux's architecture and development model have earned respect within cybersecurity communities. Users concerned about privacy, transparency, and control often view Linux as an attractive alternative. The rise of Linux also reflects broader cultural shifts within the technology industry. Open source software has become increasingly influential across virtually every sector of computing. Major corporations contribute to open source projects, universities incorporate open technologies into education, and governments deploy open source solutions in public infrastructure. Linux stands at the center of this movement, serving as both a practical operating system and a symbol of collaborative innovation. Microsoft's participation in this ecosystem surprised many observers because it represented a significant departure from historical assumptions. The company once viewed open source software primarily through a competitive lens. Today, it actively contributes to numerous open source initiatives and supports technologies that rely heavily on Linux. This transformation illustrates how business strategies evolve in response to technological change. Rather than resisting industry trends, Microsoft adapted by embracing the tools and platforms that customers increasingly valued. The relationship between Linux and Microsoft demonstrates that competition and cooperation can coexist within the technology sector. While Windows and Linux continue competing in certain areas, they also complement each other in important ways. Developers often use both platforms depending on their needs. Organizations deploy hybrid environments that combine technologies from multiple ecosystems. Users benefit from increased flexibility and improved interoperability. This dynamic reflects a modern approach to computing in which rigid boundaries are replaced by practical collaboration. As Linux continues challenging Windows, it does so not by attempting to replicate every aspect of Microsoft's operating system, but by offering a distinct alternative. Users are drawn to Linux for different reasons: performance, privacy, customization, security, open source principles, development tools, or cost savings. The diversity of motivations contributing to Linux adoption highlights the platform's broad appeal. Rather than serving a single audience, Linux now supports students, developers, businesses, researchers, gamers, and everyday computer users. Looking ahead, the future of desktop computing is likely to become increasingly diverse. Cloud services, web applications, and cross-platform technologies continue reducing dependence on any single operating system. In this environment, Linux is well positioned to expand its influence. Its open development model, strong technical foundation, and growing ecosystem provide advantages that align with emerging trends in computing. Meanwhile, Microsoft's continued engagement with Linux demonstrates how deeply interconnected modern technology platforms have become. The surprising connection between Linux and Microsoft ultimately reflects a larger transformation occurring throughout the technology industry. What once appeared to be competing worlds have become increasingly interconnected through shared goals, common technologies, and collaborative innovation. Linux is challenging Windows, not because it seeks to replace it entirely, but because it offers a compelling alternative that continues improving year after year. The fact that Microsoft itself now plays a role in supporting Linux